Hi, everyone.
Hey you. Hi everyone.
I'm in a different spot.
Just recording the podcast standing up. Do you think that'll change your energy at all?
I guess, I don't know. I guess we're gonna find out. I
Yeah.
feel, I feel a little different, but I think it's also because it's just different to see myself in a different light.
Yeah.
Sounds like more than it is.
Is it okay? Is there any body image stuff coming up around the
Yeah,
different
sort
light?
of, to be
Oh, okay.
honest.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm having some judgment about some stuff, and
Hmm.
I'm working through that. I can feel a bit of myself like not fully present, so
Okay.
I do notice that.
Shall I tell you a little story while you settle in?
Sure.
Okay. The other day I was at my dad's for dinner and he'd cooked this really lovely meal. He'd marinated this tofu. There was as beetroot and bell pepper salad, and there was avocado and these spiced potatoes that he'd done. And it was this really nice meal of like lots of different things and flavors. And he gives me my meal. And as we're eating, he says to me, "Oh, I made some mung bean bread. Do you want some?" And I was like, "Oh, I don't know. Don't know about mung
Never
bean
had
bread."
that.
No, neither have I. And so I said, "Well, let me just taste a bit, in case I don't like it." So he brings some in and he goes to give me a whole roll. And I say, "No, no, I just want to break a piece off and try it first." And he's like, "Just take a roll." I said, "Yeah, but I just want to try it because I don't know if you like it." And he goes, "Sarah, it's just bread like this." And I was like, "I know. It's not just bread. It's mung bean bread, which is the whole point." And so I said, "I know. I just wanted to taste it first because I didn't want to waste any if I don't like it." And he said, "Why are you being so difficult?" And I was like, "I don't think I'm being difficult. I think I just want to try the food." Anyway, he just puts it on my plate. By the way, it was delicious. But
Oh,
obviously, then I couldn't tell him that because I was so annoyed at the way he'd spoken to me. So he was already in a spiky, slightly funny mood. At the end of the meal, I'd picked us up some carrot cake for dessert at this cafe that just does the best carrot cake. And I gave him some and I had some. And I'm eating it and he goes, "Oh, you don't mind having carrot cake." He does this thing where he always says you. And as a therapist, I always hear that. And I once tried to like pull him up on, "Why do you always say you when I mean I?" And he just got really annoyed with me. So I just let him do it. But he said, "You don't mind having carrot cake after a guilt-free meal like that."
ah,
So I just said, I don't feel guilty about food." And he goes, "Well, you should." And in the moment, and I wish this had happened prior to we recorded the episode on like, how do I deal with comments?
yeah.
Because it really surprised me because, well, one, it sounded incredibly judgmental.
Mm-hmm.
I also was thinking, is this personal? Because the way he said it was very personal, as in, like, you're wrong for not feeling guilt around food. And so my response, I was really impressed with myself, actually. I just said to him, "I used to feel really guilty about food and it really messed me up. And since I feel less guilty about food, I actually feel a lot more balanced." And he just went silent, which I'm going to take as a win.
Okay.
But it was intriguing. And I thought about it afterwards. I thought, why was he in such a weird
Mm.
mood? And I think because I haven't grown up with him making judgmental comments about my eating, it was much easier for me to respond from a very here and now place and go, "I really don't think that was about me.
Okay.
I've decided that that wasn't personal at all." I don't think it is because he said to me once before, he said something about, because he talks about his eating a lot, how he doesn't feel guilty about anything he eats. But he sort of said it in a way that maybe if I did feel guilty about it, then that might be the thing that reins me in. And he thinks because he doesn't have enough guilt about it,
Mm.
that
Like he
it doesn't.
needs
And
it.
yeah, and I really felt that projection onto me. It felt like
Yes.
projection, and I was able to treat it as such. But I thought it was interesting when we were talking about this episode of those times when the idea of letting go of feeling bad about something we think is wrong, that also feels wrong, whether we're using the word guilt or not. If I don't feel bad about this thing that I'm doing, that I'm trying to stop doing, will I then just give up and not try to, let's use the word binge eating, not try to stop binge eating? And that's the topic.
I understand why you brought that story up because it's completely related to this topic. But I'm so stuck on other parts of the story that I'm having trouble tending to the point.
Let's go off point. Hey, we can change the topic of the podcast.
No, I think it's a really good one, but I just know that I'm feeling something about the comment part. And I know we already did an episode on dealing with comments. And the way that you've reconciled that, I think, is really helpful for people to sort of hear and for me to hear. And also, I feel like there's a part of me that's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. But, well, there's a part of me that I don't know that I could have answered that way because that kind of comment was not innocuous for me growing up. And there's a part of me that's alive right now. Like that's kind of just like, ooh, like, like there's this accountability factor. Almost like there's a part of me that's like, you have to be accountable, not you, but like your dad has to be accountable for that. Like, how could you not say something to your dad about how mean that is? Also to understand that maybe that like the you in that sentence wasn't necessarily you, but more reflection of we should all, I should feel guilty in order to make change. But there's something so personal in the you that I'm just needing to name. It's a good, you know what? We were going to do an episode on how to deal with triggers. And I feel like that's a good episode for us to do eventually because I feel like there's like a triggerability and stuff like that for me. That sort of, again, it takes me away from what's at hand. It takes me away from what the present topic is, which is literally what's happening. So I'm not triggered, but it's in the family for me. So, however, moving forward to the role of guilt in making change. I guess in this scenario, it's kind of like, well, are we talking about does guilt have a role in making change? And we're also talking about is the change we're looking to make, like, what's the viability of that goal? You know what I mean? Because for your dad, there is a reason to, I don't know, what would be to like there's morality around certain foods. And for you, it's kind of like there's not morality around certain foods. So then guilt as a means to the thing that is self-defined can be the thing in question. Like, what are we trying to change? And is that really, like, is that something we have to look at, the thing we're trying to change, in addition to the method by which we would go about changing something in the first place? I don't know which one speaks more to me first.
Well, if we look at what guilt is I've done something wrong, I'm doing something wrong, or maybe even I'm about to do something wrong. So it starts with this whole that there's something wrong. Now, with binging, there wasn't really a sense of, even in hindsight, I can understand the why. There's never been a sense of like, oh, this is a great thing for me to do. This is really helping me. I can see how it was trying to now and have compassion for that. So it's like, can we not like something that we are doing, whether it's a compulsion or whatever it is, without making ourselves guilty?
Yes.
Yeah, it was kind of, I mean, I wasn't, I thought it would be yes, but.
Because I feel like if I didn't 100%, but it's like how, I guess. Maybe if you're coming from a place of always feeling guilty about anything or everything, then how do you not feel guilty about certain things? Especially if you believe that guilt is the way to change it, which makes sense. And let's talk about that because that's the purpose of the emotion of guilt. That's why we have it, is actually to point us towards things that might need, what's a better word? Want to change or to look at. What is a classic example of this? If we hurt somebody, if we're mean to somebody and we feel guilty about that, it's appropriate guilt because there's some messaging coming through the body saying, look at that, being mean, this is something we might need to change or look at or have more awareness around because it's not a nice thing. But we just have taken guilt, I think, to extremes. We could talk about why, not everybody does. I think that some people live with much less guilt than other people, but some of us have guilt all the time about everything, including and the food piece of that is also very learned. There's a lot of morality in food. But I think even aside from that, there's something about the tendency to feel guilty about anything that goes wrong or anything that's human within us, or the idea that we should always be better than we are, like doing better than we are, that guilt is just like bulldozing us. What do you do if you're starting from that place?
Well, it begins with the deconstruction of whether the act itself is wrong. So we might think that being mean or unkind to someone, on the whole, we're going to say that actually we might stop and look at that and go, I still feel like that is wrong. That's against my values to treat people like that in this way. Not to say we're not human beings that don't, get snippy or spiky or something like that, but I'm talking about when it goes against a value. And so with something like the food piece, it's interesting though. I find fascinating. My dad is a fascinating person, honestly, is that he sees it as certain things as wrong and doesn't feel guilty about it.
Can you give an example?
Yeah, like the food.
Like that?
Yeah. So like the food. Because, well, and even then, I don't even know that he sees it as wrong. This is the interesting thing. It's almost like I think he thinks he should see it as wrong. It's really hard. I really think that pulling at this thread will take us way off track because my dad is an anomaly that I
don't
doubt many
know.
people here can relate to.
Either well, it's like, is there denial about something going on? Like, is he actually not feeling guilty or is he saying he's not feeling guilty and he actually is, or is he saying the thing is wrong and he doesn't actually, you know what I mean? Like which side of the equation is actually not happening? Or do you, I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but like, can you be so well adjusted that you can see that there's something you want to change that you're not changing and you have an opinion about that, but you just don't carry guilt about it? Like, can that be a well adjusted way to be? What would make him not well adjusted in this scenario?
The pattern of where it shows up everywhere. Like, just noticing how he responds to guilt in general. I think maybe it's about protection from shame. That actually maybe he doesn't know how to feel guilt about something without it tipping over into shame. So it's like it feels like a very defended, it feels like defenses. That's my instinct with it.
Why would some of us be more willing to go into guilt than others then? What's the difference between somebody who's afraid of shame versus somebody who runs right towards it?
Okay. This is one potential theory that might apply in some situations. So I know there's going to be an alternate point of view, but it's not. There are, and I feel like you have certainly potentially been here at some point, whereby guilt can be used as a tool to sort of force some kind of behavioral compliance for a while. Whereas I think for me, guilt rarely led to me then being able to restrict for any period of time. And I think that's just potentially a permitter thing, the rebellious pushback. Guilt is an emotion that I think I almost rebel against. So I would feel it, but it wouldn't then make me change my behavior in the context of something. This is interesting because there are places, this is interesting because there are places potentially in life where is it the guilt though that would make me stop, or just the fact that I'm like, I just don't think this is okay? And that I think can be
Give
different
me an
as well.
example.
Okay, right. Let's say a friend of mine told me something really personal and wanted me not to tell anybody.
Okay.
The reason why, and then obviously if it got out and it was down to me, I would feel really guilty. But the reason why I wouldn't break her confidence is not because, oh, I feel guilty if I do, but because I don't want to do that. Like that's not okay with me to my friend. Like, and so I wonder then with food whether there's this place to kind of go, actually, that's not. So, for example, big part of my recovery was becoming more conscious and aware when I was eating. There's nothing inherently wrong with going unconscious with food or numbing with food. I don't think any of those are a moral thing that make us wrong or bad people in any way. But I did get to a point where I was going, this isn't okay with me.
Yeah. So the difference between guilt and the integrity of a value.
Yeah, but that's still slightly different from the friend scenario because I would still say it was wrong to breach their confidence.
That's the integrity of your value. Well, it's what it's doing is asking us the question of, if we think we need guilt to change, is a better, like, is it that we need guilt to change, or is it that we actually need the integrity of a value to change?
Ooh.
In order to change, I mean, not we need that thing to change. Like, for example, there's a difference between saying, I feel so guilty about the way I eat and don't exercise. Like, I need that to make me change. We know that this is like the opposite of likely to happen then. But what you might actually, to clarify what you're actually trying to do, is to say, I need the integrity of my self-care to start changing. And that could actually help. Like, we need to distinguish between guilt as a driver and integrity or self-care as a driver. And this distinction might look exactly this. The behaviors on the outside might look exactly the same, but the motives are different. So I had a client I was talking to yesterday on WhatsApp who said, who had this temptation to restrict and was, but knew like that wasn't taking her down the right road. So she was eating meals and sort of telling me, with each part of the day, like, I had my breakfast and it was, I had my lunch, and she gave herself some, like, a nourishing lunch with satisfying food groups. And she said, it is so different to think about eating this lunch from the viewpoint of, I need to take care of myself, than it is for me to think of it from the viewpoint of, I need to eat healthy today. And it was like, she's eating the same thing, or some of the same things, but the difference is not in, I'm doing this to be healthy, because that would be guilt driven, versus I'm doing this because I need the nourishment and I need to take care of myself. And that's a different thing, right? So do we need guilt, or do we need to be more empowered around our values? Again, tricky, nuanced conversation, because you can't just be empowered around your values and stop binging if there's other things at play creating the binging. I think with food, there's always this caveat. Mm-hmm. But let's maybe talk about it outside of food. These other things that we're trying to do for ourselves. We talked about consistency in a recent episode, and self-trust. And, we still want things for ourselves, and there's nothing wrong with that. Self-compassion is often interpreted as, just forget about the things you want for yourself and understand that you're not doing them and just be okay with that. That's not what self-compassion is. Self-compassion is just saying we don't need guilt to help us do those things. We need alignment to help us do those things. So it's safe to get rid of guilt and to bring in alignment. But that's also not something you just snap your fingers and do, because that kind of self-allyship comes from self-alliance. And that is a whole process. Like, if we're a self-abandoned, we're not in self-alliance. So we're not acting on our own behalf. We're acting on the behalf of the should, right? So this is way more complex than just don't feel guilty. And it also explains why just not feeling guilty doesn't quite feel right, because it feels like we still need something that holds us in alignment with a value integrity. And guilt is the only thing we know how to do that with. I think it's not the best way. There's better ways to align with your goals from a self-care point of view, but it starts with self-alliance. Guilt is not that.
Yeah, so the black and white application of just don't feel guilty is going to look like, just feel fine about everything you eat. That's just doesn't matter. And there are going to be times when you eat where you think, oh, that was not okay. It was not okay with me. As in, like, not okay from a moral perspective, but just
not what I wanted.
I'd use the word regret.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I regret not stopping sooner, or I regret having that thing an hour before dinner, and now I'm sitting down at my dinner and I'm like, oh man, I was really looking forward to this dinner and now I'm not. And I used an analogy, a while ago on Instagram, I did a reel, and I used the analogy of going out for a walk and it starts to rain. If you went out for a walk and it started to rain and you hadn't taken an umbrella with you, you might be pretty annoyed that you don't have an umbrella. And you might be like, oh man, should have checked the weather forecast before I came out. I'm a bit annoyed that I didn't really think about this. I didn't really stop to think if I needed an umbrella, and now I don't have one, and I'm getting wet, and that's a bit uncomfortable. It's very different, because you wouldn't feel, I think it's unlikely that you would feel guilt for not taking an umbrella out with you. But had you given it a bit of thought, then you probably would have taken an umbrella with you.
Not someone like me.
What, are you the one who never takes an umbrella?
I'd not bring in the umbrella, and then I would have been like, why do you do that? I would have made it a story about why I'm so annoyingly unprepared, and I willingly do that. Like, I do that. That would become.
What's that feeling though, when you're telling yourself?
Not guilt though. It's
what is it?
Frustration. Well, now it's frustration. Maybe at one time it would have been shame of some kind, like kind of like, what's wrong with you? You're so weird. Like, why do you do that stuff all the time? Now I'm just like, ugh. It's like old patterns just presenting themselves. And I'm like, oh, that's so frustrating. Actually, if that happened, I think that because I've got some more self-alliance now, I would be kind of like, this happens a lot. Like, I do this a lot. And And it's not helping me anymore. I used to be someone who I just impulsively did everything because I didn't want to ever think. I had this issue with prepare. I don't know. I don't want to go in the weeds, but it's some weird thing that I would do and still kind of do where I don't want to take the time to like be overly prepared. I just want to go. I just want to do it. This happened the other day when I was getting dressed and I had no underwear in my drawer, and Mike came in the room and I was like, I have no underwear. And he was like, okay, I'll go grab you some. And he went to go like get the laundry basket from downstairs. In the meantime, I found like this ratty old pair of underwear that I need to throw away. And I just put them on. And when he came up, he's like, I have. And I'm like, no, too late. It's already done. And he's like, but you don't like, do you want these? Because these are better. And I was like, no. And he was like, well, I wouldn't have gone to get them if you were going to. I'm like, it doesn't matter. Like, I don't want to take the time to slow down to do the thorough thing. And this is something I do. And I think it comes from nervous system stuff, but it also is annoying and it doesn't serve me a lot. Like it actually, I'll suffer wearing the yucky underwear, like yucky by yucky. I just mean old.
You suffer. You're such a trooper.
For going with the story and not cutting it out.
No, for all the suffering you've gone through.
Did I say suffer?
Yeah,
did I?
You did.
Because it could be about a bigger thing. And I would rather be uncomfortable than slow down. Mm-hmm. Anyway, it's a pattern and has been a pattern for a long time. And now I think it's kind of like, if it was really bothering me, like the rain, I would kind of be like, maybe this is something I need to look at. Maybe I need to slow down and start thinking more about slowing down. But that is different than me being like, oh, you're so weird and annoying. Why do you do that? You need to stop doing that. That's guilt. The integrity of values is more like, maybe it'd be more comfortable or drier in the rain. Like maybe slowing down might be helpful to us now, and coming at it from that perspective versus from the perspective of what I'm doing wrong. Mm-hmm. It's like looking at a positive instead of a negative. There's a total difference in the energy of that.
I think guilt is really problematic when you're feeling guilty about not being the version of yourself you think you should be. And that for me is where it might bleed out into other areas. Yesterday, I finished work at lunchtime and it was a sunny day and the weather's been rubbish here. And I thought, I'll go down the beach. And so I went down the beach, and then as I'm sitting on the beach, I'm going, it's Wednesday, you had this whole afternoon. Like, you could have been getting this done, this done. And I started thinking about all the things I could get done. And I stopped myself. I was like, Sarah, like, take the afternoon to just be on the beach. That's okay to not be doing all the time. So I think where it might show up for me now is there's always this like little hanging over feeling that I could be doing more. Always this sense of like, I could be doing a bit more. I could be getting this done. Could be getting that done. Think of, sometimes I'll get really like, what's the word? It's not quite grandiose, but really earnest in my, you could be like creating content that's helping people and you're just sitting here on the beach.
Yeah. I think that one's dangerous. Like I'm using very big words today. Like maybe a little catastrophic words. It's not dangerous. It's tricky because that relates to the episode we did about self-indulgence and self-care, like the hustle ideal too, of like always needing to produce and perform or do the thing that looks like the more, I don't know,
productive, just like it's
productive thing. Because I do think guilt, and I don't know, does this exist in any other place besides where it's compared with productivity? You know what I mean? Like, or thin. It's like these values of the mainstream culture of like, you have to be working really hard, you have to be trying to be thin, and you have to be making a lot of money. Like all these, if you're doing anything that suggests that you're not racing towards one of those things, we automatically have this guilt sense about it. And that's dangerous-ish because then we are completely neglecting like a humanity side that isn't meant to always be chasing and running and doing and performing and achieving. I think during COVID, I spent a long time, like I listened to a lot of podcasts and read a lot about the value of the opposite of mainstream ideals. And so it's kind of like when you're not doing something, you're doing something. And I know that's still using a productivity mindset, but I don't care. It works. It's like, I still feel like so yesterday, it's that 1 week of the summer right now where the kids don't have school. They got off last week. They don't start camps till next week. So this week they're off. which means they're outside the door right now. Mike and I are working and they're just sort of fending for themselves. It's just like one of those poor planning things on our parts. And yesterday, Mike was out with two of the kids and Alex was home, and she's been in like a little bit of a funk. I think she's a little depressed about school ending. Again, depressed being a big word, but she's a little low about school ending. And I had some client calls yesterday afternoon, and I was about to go in my office for 3 hours, and she was out there, and I was like, now she's can handle herself. I mean, she is fine, and I come out in between them and stuff like that. Normally this wouldn't bother, but the place she's in right now, I was like, I don't know. I just felt like she needed me, and I canceled two of my calls because, which I never do, and I would feel like that's kind of like, oh, like that challenges something in me about not just about performing or working, but more about like other people and commitment to other people. But I canceled, and it was kind of like, I'm not doing that thing, rather than looking at it like I'm disappointing people or not working. It was like in saying no to that, I'm showing up for my daughter. And sometimes it's showing up for ourselves in a way, or like showing up for the part of us that needs rest and relaxation and joy and pleasure, which is something we get a lot of requests about talking about those topics. But then when it comes to it, do we really feel guilty about offering ourselves those things? And it's just more about, what are you doing when you're not doing something, and flipping guilt to be like, no, it's making room for this other thing. That's the productivity, so to speak.
Mm. And I talked myself down very quickly on Wednesday when I caught myself doing it. I said, Sarah, it's fine to just be doing nothing. You don't have to be doing something all the time. And I could see that. And that, I think, and it could tie with food and all kinds of things, to go, I'm doing nothing wrong. I'm not doing anything wrong. And guilt is that feeling, is that we're doing something wrong, or the not doing of the thing is what's wrong. But I think the hardest is when I feel like I really do waste time. When I had one on Saturday. I had a what I'm now calling a collapse day, where I just collapsed. It's like I got up in the morning and I was like, I feel like I've got nothing. There's no motivation in me to do anything. And so I remember having that sort of slight moment where I'm sort of tussling with myself, going, Sarah, if you really just sink into a sofa day now, you're not going to feel great about it. But at the same time going, but I don't want to do anything. I don't want to do anything. So I remember thinking at the time, going like, okay, then let's go for it. I don't think we're going to feel great for it, but let's intentionally go into, and it was really intentional, just going like, I'm just having a collapse day. And the Traitors US was available on BBC iPlayer. So I binge watched that. And yes, I felt terrible by the end of the day because I didn't move all day. And then I did go out for a meal with my friend in the evening. And at the end of the day, I was kind of like, I don't think that was really what I wanted or what I needed. But I also recognized that in that moment, I didn't feel like there was anything else available to me.
Yeah.
There was a whole then it was what it was. And I really didn't beat myself up for it, but I really did notice that I didn't feel good for it. I didn't feel rested.
Yeah.
But it was just a collapse day, and they come for me. And so sometimes I don't have a choice, and I'm annoyed about that, but annoyance is better than guilt.
Yes. I want to thank you for bringing this up.
You are welcome.
Yeah. We could do a montage on all the times you've said it just like that. I would really enjoy that. Because one, you're highlighting something that I think you've talked about, collapse days, without speaking of them with that terminology, but I like it. And you talk about it enough where I'm like, it normalizes mine, because I have them too. And it's like, okay, we have them, even if we have them, even if we've,
Can
recovered.
I just say what my brain does with that when I hear you saying that you have them too?
What?
It goes, it goes, not like I do. I'm like, Steph is at least like feeding kids or doing something.
Sometimes I'm not. Sometimes I offload to my husband, to Mike, and he knows. Like when I have days like that, I'm like, you gotta do it. And yes, sometimes it's like bare minimum, but it's like it's worse, because then you're like, you're not showing up for your kids, or you're like barely. It's awful.
No, mine's worse.
Mine's worse.
Mine is.
We can talk about that later. But it normalizes that for me. And I'm sure it normalizes that for everyone listening. And that it's like, oh, you don't have to not have that to be a mentally well human, like in general, or just a human in general. So that's number one. Number two is to emphasize the difference between what I was talking about and what you're talking about, which is I think sometimes people need the permission to not hustle, etc., and give themselves more permission to take care of themselves. And that is hard for many people and a worthy cause, but also can still feel like there's a value trade-off. You know what I mean? Like you're not doing this other thing, but you are doing this other thing. What you're talking about is no, there's not a value trade-off. Like I still feel like crap, and maybe it wasn't even what I needed. And that's a different kind of guilt because it's like I didn't actually rest, or I didn't actually like, you didn't turn around at the end of the day and say, like, you know what? I didn't work, but gosh darn it, I really feel like I took care of myself and I gave myself some nurturing, you know? It doesn't even feel like that. And then that normalized that for me because I sometimes do the same thing. And I'm like, I think that wasn't actually quite good for me. like now I'm in a deeper hole, maybe. This is where this conversation becomes relevant because you could feel guilty about that. And maybe sometimes we do. But this is where that, going back to the beginning of the episode of the integrity of values can come up because one, first of all, I think sometimes it's just like there's no other choice you had. So it's kind of just like, that's not a value per se, but it's like, it's a reality of sometimes we don't know, we can't make another decision. And maybe it's a compassion value. But there's also kind of like the looking at that. And I've done this before where I have had that happen one too many times, still happens, by the way, but where I've thought to myself, what goes on here? Like, what's happening when this happens to me? Is there something I need to learn from it? Like, is this always preceded by something? Is there a trigger for something like this? Let me look at that. Is there something else I'd rather be doing in a time like this? Let me look at that. And maybe the answer is no. Is there a plan I can make for times like this that might even include allowing myself to do it and not feel great at the end and letting that be okay? I think that guilt is saying, how might I help myself here if I can? Maybe I can't, but can I look at it? And you can do that. We can do that without guilt. You know what I mean? So, and I've done that in smaller case scenarios where on Wednesdays, before I write my Wednesday weekly, I was always having a bit of a difficult morning. It was hard. Like there was something I would get really antsy. And then I would waste time. And then I would get to like the time where my client calls start and I'm like, I have 20 minutes now to write my Wednesday weekly. Like, what am I doing with this morning? And it was kind of like, I don't know. I need to look at that though and think about how I might strategize my morning or differently plan my morning or accept that this is the way it runs. And that's something I have sort of like thought about without needing to have guilt to do that. Like there's still empowerment to be had if you feel like that's what's called for without guilt. With empowerment, by the way, just sometimes being acceptance, not like you have to change it.
Yeah, I remember sitting there and going like, just sort of talking to myself and testing my willingness. What do I feel willing to do? What am I able to do here? I felt like I could see it really clearly and still didn't feel like I had whatever it was that I needed in me to make a different choice in that moment. And I don't feel guilty about that. I just feel really sad about it, actually.
Yeah. That to me is what we're avoiding, to be sad about it. Because you could spend a lot of time feeling guilty instead, you know, and then you wouldn't get to the heart of it, which is the sadness about it. And I think that that's part of why we block it up with the defenses per your dad of like, well, then if at the end of it, all we get to is like, I have nothing left to say to you. No, like, yeah, it's just like, it's sad. And if that's the bottom line, sometimes we're avoiding that.
Yeah. So with the question of this podcast about whether guilt is helpful at all, did we find anywhere it was, or are we saying it's not?
I think we're saying that what we think of as guilt itself, no, I think. No surprise there. But I think that the thing that we're thinking guilt is actually more what you want for yourself, or even if it's just getting down to the sadness piece, like looking at what clarity, you know, there's something else to do there that might be more of what the opposite of surrender is, but it's not guilt driven necessarily.
So then if you have a high value on losing weight, pursuing weight loss, then anytime you behave in a way that is kind of going in the opposite direction to that, you can't avoid the guilt, can you? Because if you're like, I really, really want this thing, I need this thing of weight loss, and then I have compulsively eaten, binged or whatever, if you could just decide without that value being examined, I don't think you
Correct.
can't stop the guilt from coming, right?
Correct. I think that in that case, and with enough readiness, it would be examining the goal. For me, it was changing it from, it's not like I didn't want to, it's not like my desire for weight loss went away, but what replaced it as the goal was being able to stay with myself if it didn't happen. Because I was doing everything I could to, it wasn't for, I would say it wasn't for lack of trying, except you could have said, yes, it was because you were binging or not dieting anymore. But like, that still was all I could do. Like, there wasn't other choices. Like, it just was, that's what it was. So then it became about, do I want to, I will sit here feeling guilty for the rest of my life if I let myself, or I have to change what my goal is, which is not to say I don't want to lose weight, but to say, if I can't, how do I stay in my life? Like, how do I stay with myself in my life?
Mm-hmm.
Similar.
You've spoken before how particularly back when it was really difficult for you to show up at certain things. And it wasn't because you didn't want to be there for your friends or that it wasn't important, but that it just felt impossible. And then did you feel guilt about letting people down when you weren't able to show up?
Well, I felt like it made me a flaky, lazy person because there was a part of me that just couldn't rally. And there was another part of me that thought that understood if I went, I'd probably feel better or that I'd be glad I went, but it wasn't enough to get me to go. And reconciling that shadow side of myself, it was hard not to feel guilty about being like that kind of person. I had a discussion with a client yesterday about this because she's like, it speaks to the part of her identity that is more isolated, or needs more space and like quiet time. And just, she says it speaks to like a lazier part of me. And it's hard to not want to put guilt in front of that, because if we don't feel guilty, then we're just accepting that this is a part of us. So we talked about this as far as maybe the guilt is in the way of actually assimilating certain parts of our shadow sides into ourself. I mean, there's also other ways of reconceptualizing. I have reconceptualized kind of like my need to not show up sometimes is not because I'm lazy. It's because I have firm boundaries around my need to restore. If I don't have that, I'm no good. And that's okay with me now to be an introvert. I've made peace with that, but that used to be a rejected shadow side. But even if there's a part of us that's lazy, if that's what we want to call it, there's a part of us that is, and parts in. And I think having guilt is trying to say, I reject that that's a part of me. And I think you can do that for the rest of your life too. I think guilt is a buffer for maybe there's a part of me that's lazy sometimes.
Not me. I'm never lazy.
I don't feel the self-consciousness anymore
About
my reflection.
okay. Yeah.
So sometimes distraction works, unless I just buried it and I'm gonna have to go somatically discharge it.
It's interesting though how this is completely an aside, but how different I feel like I look on different things, like so different. Like to me, I'm like, how do people see this as the same person?
Yeah.
I don't know. It's so strange to me.
I think so too for myself, but for
Yeah.
you, I know I get what you can say, because like sometimes skin color looks different or this or that, but it's still because our brain fills in the gaps,
Weird. But yeah. Anyway.
Mm-hmm. Do you feel a little depressed now?
I feel a little bit my energy feels quite low.
Yeah, it went low.
Yeah. I suddenly feel like I don't know why really.
Well, maybe we don't need to.
Okay. Well,
I like your okay. It's like such a Sarah-ism. Okay.
Okay.
It's your transitionary word.
Yeah. Well, everybody.
Okay. Well,
okay. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being you. And yeah, go forth and don't feel guilty, okay?
Okay, bye.